Chapter 66. Swoosh swoosh. Dark clouds filled the sky, shrouding the entire world, causing the originally bright day to turn into a dark night. Wild winds surged in the sky above the green forest as a huge whirlwind expanded across the land. Waves of energy continued to emerge from the sky. After which, they were swept into this whirlpool and disappeared in a flash. In the middle of the endless green forest, a young man in white was sitting cross-legged on a piece of green rock with his legs bent. The man's eyes were shut, and his face appeared a little pale. Both of his hands formed a training seal as he absorbed the natural energy for his own training. Waves of mottled natural energy fell from the huge whirlpool above his head. They gathered into a thick energy pillar that surged into the man's body from the Bai-Hui acupoint on his head. After which, it was refined and absorbed by the man. This situation repeated for a couple of hours. Only after the energy whirlpool above the man's head slowly disappeared did the man withdraw from his training state. Xiao Yan slowly opened his eyes. A brilliant light flashed deep within his eyes. Soon after, the air in front of Xiao Yan became distorted. It was accompanied by tiny black lines. Qi. A towering ancient tree a couple of dozen feet away from Xiao Yan suddenly emitted a qi sound. Immediately, it turned into tiny powder that scattered down. An unknown cold wind blew past and the powder disappeared. Hu. Xiao Yan deeply exhaled a mouthful of turbid air that had been suppressed in his chest. Both of his eyes narrowed once again. He lifted his head and gently inhaled the pure air. The corners of Xiao Yan's mouth lifted as he sensed the waves of comfort that were emitted from all over his body. After half a month of recovery, the injuries in my body are more or less healed. Haha, the strength of your physical body has exceeded my expectations. If it was an ordinary person, I'm afraid that it would take at least a couple of months to recover from such serious injuries. TSK. Moreover, the Dragon Phoenix bloodline in your body. TSK, they are all extraordinary things. The corners of Xiao Yan's mouth once again curled into a smile upon hearing this, but he did not reply. After such a long time, Xiao Yan was already used to Gu Yu's unpredictable appearance. Hence, he was not too surprised. Xiao Yan paused for a moment. The corner of his mouth carried a smile. His eyes suddenly became calm as he slowly opened his mouth and said, "Yes, I didn't expect my injuries to heal so quickly. And this, it's all thanks to that black-clothed man." At the end of his words, Xiao Yan's originally calm tone suddenly turned cold, causing the temperature around Xiao Yan to abruptly drop. Shaking his head, Xiao Yan tossed these thoughts out of his mind. He straightened his body and twisted left and right. Then, with a violent shake, the bluestone Xiao Yan was sitting on shattered into a pile of dust. On the other hand, Xiao Yan was still sitting cross-legged on the spot, not moving at all. Upon closer inspection, Xiao Yan was actually sitting in the air. There was no need for the bluestone as a cushion. After resting for a moment, Xiao Yan's spiritual strength spread out. A thought passed through his mind and he heard the rustling sound of leaves within the forest. Then, a wild rabbit flew in front of Xiao Yan. Xiao Yan smiled and said indifferently, "Tonight, you can only eat me. I hope that you will have a good reincarnation in your next life." After that, Xiao Yan's spiritual power fluctuated again. Soon after, the fragrance of meat drifted out of the forest. The next day, Xiao Yan's eyelids trembled as he slowly opened his eyes. With a flip of his right hand, a pill the size of a longan appeared in Xiao Yan's right palm. Tai Blood Recovery Pill, a Tier 9 golden pill. It was the pill with the fastest recovery rate among the Tier 9 pills. When used when seriously injured, it could speed up the recovery rate of the injury. Usually, it would take a month, but after using the Tai Blood Recovery Pill, half a month was enough. In this way, the efficacy of the Tai Blood Recovery Pill could be seen. But the only flaw was that the Tai Blood Recovery Pill's efficacy was too strong. It couldn't be used when seriously injured, so Xiao Yan didn't care too much about it at first and only refined a few pills. Now that he thought about it, Xiao Yan was quite glad. Although he didn't refine too many, these few pills were enough for his current situation. Otherwise, when the black-clothed man caught up with him and he was seriously injured, it would be too late for regrets. After taking the pill, Xiao Yan closed his eyes again and calmed his mind to refine it. The pill melted in his mouth and instantly turned into a scorching but not very strong energy flow, rushing into Xiao Yan's body. In Xiao Yan's body, a scarlet energy wave shuttled between his meridians and organs. Everywhere it passed, it was red. In this red, there was a tingling feeling. Coupled with the bursts of scorching heat, it made Xiao Yan feel that everything in his body was a little swollen. In the outside world, Xiao Yan's face was flushed red, the veins on his forehead squirmed, and tiny beads of sweat overflowed from his forehead and slid down his cheeks. Looking at Xiao Yan's body, in the center of the cyclone, there was a scarlet bead, emitting bursts of scorching energy fluctuations. Waves of fiery red airwaves swept out from Xiao Yan's body and spread to Xiao Yan's entire body. When the fiery red energy came into contact with Xiao Yan's muscles and organs, it directly immersed into them. At the same time, it also transmitted bursts of swelling pain to Xiao Yan, making Xiao Yan feel very uncomfortable. This repeated state lasted for a full 12 hours, and Xiao Yan was also tortured by the medicinal strength of the pill until he was somewhat numb. The clothes all over Xiao Yan's body were completely soaked in sweat, tightly sticking to his body. Finally, the medicinal strength of the Tai blood recovery pill was completely refined by Xiao Yan, immersing into all the organs and meridians in Xiao Yan's body, unceasingly healing the injuries in Xiao Yan's body for a long time. The instant the medicinal pill was completely refined, Xiao Yan's body became weak and he fell backward. He lay flat on the grass and quickly fell into a deep sleep. Chapter 67. Half a month later. Wind howled in the sky. It was clearly the hot sun in the sky, but one could not feel even the slightest bit of warmth. The white-clothed Xiao Yan was seated on an empty ground in the forest. Both of his hands formed a seal and formed a training seal. Threads of natural energy involuntarily gathered toward Xiao Yan. After which, they were refined and absorbed by Xiao Yan. Xiao Yan withdrew from his training state 2 hours later. He sensed the abundant dou qi in his body and smiled faintly. Until today, the injuries that Xiao Yan had suffered in the fight with the Third Hall Masters group could be considered to have completely healed. The injuries on his body had healed, but the pain in Xiao Yan's heart had not lessened. His injuries had healed, but the injuries that the heavy Xian ruler had suffered from blocking the attack for him were still present. Xiao Yan flipped his hand and a huge black ruler appeared in Xiao Yan's hand. It was the heavy Xian ruler. Unfortunately, after the Third Hall Master's punch and palm, the heavy Xian ruler's body had already been replaced by cracks. At a glance, it seemed as though it would instantly fall apart if one were to gently bend it with one's hand. Xiao Yan used one hand to hold the huge ruler from below while his other hand gently rubbed the surface of the huge ruler. Xiao Yan could naturally use his strength to allow the heavy Xian ruler to float in the air. However, the heavy Xian ruler was currently on the verge of collapse. Additionally, Xiao Yan had various feelings for this heavy Xian ruler and Yao Lao. Even if he had the strength, how could he be at ease allowing it to float in the air? Xiao Yan's hand rubbed the tiny cracks on the heavy Xian ruler. His heart missed the days when he had carried the heavy Xian ruler and followed Yao Lao to roam the continent. Xiao Yan's expression was indifferent. The corners of his mouth curled into a smile. Gu Yu, who was within Xiao Yan's body, quietly nodded when he saw this. This person's character was so calm. He was able to remain so calm even when facing such a great enmity. He was extraordinary. An enemy who showed everything on his face was not scary. What was scary was an enemy who would still smile at you after suffering a loss. Because you often don't know how terrifying the abyss of hell is beneath that smile. After a long while, Xiao Yan's hands paused slightly. With a flash of light in his hand, the dark heavy buster sword was put into the storage ring by Xiao Yan. Xiao Yan's figure moved, and in the next moment, a white-robed figure suddenly appeared on a mountain peak a few hundred miles away. Xiao Yan stood on top of the mountain peak with his hands behind his back. His soul power gushed out from Xiao Yan's forehead and spread out in all directions. A moment later, Xiao Yan frowned slightly. His figure flashed again and flew towards the depths of the mountain forest. 15 minutes later, Xiao Yan's advancing body paused slightly. His spiritual strength once again spread out, taking in everything within a radius of a few thousand miles into his eyes. 7 rank 9 magical beasts, 16 rank 8 magical beasts, 49 rank 7 magical beasts, over 100 rank 6 magical beasts, and even more. These magical beasts were suppressed by this powerful aura that had suddenly appeared when Xiao Yan probed. All of them lay on the ground submissively and did not even dare to make a sound. Xiao Yan's expression was indifferent. A cold glint flashed deep within his eyes. Soon after, he lifted his hand. A muffled bang sounded, and a cluster of brilliant flames rose from Xiao Yan's palm. The world suddenly became dry at the moment the heavenly flame rose. Even a breath of air would cause one's throat to feel dry and painful. A thought passed through Xiao Yan's mind, and the heavenly flame in his hand emitted a strange ripple. In the next moment, before those magical beasts could react, they were turned into nothingness, leaving behind traces of pure blood and monster cores of various colors. A thought passed through Xiao Yan's mind. In the next moment, the sky was instantly replaced by monster cores that blotted out the sky and covered the earth. The heavenly flame in Xiao Yan's hand flew out and spread out, enveloping all of the monster cores. Amidst a sizzling sound, the monster cores were refined by the heavenly flame until only droplets of pure energy were left. A moment later, Xiao Yan flipped his palm again, and the heavy Xian ruler appeared in Xiao Yan's hand. In the space in front of Xiao Yan, a huge cluster of brilliant energy droplets was quietly floating. Xiao Yan pushed his palm forward, sending the heavy Xian ruler into the cluster of droplets. Immediately after, the seals in Xiao Yan's hands changed. In the next moment, a huge cluster of heavenly flame appeared in front of Xiao Yan, and wrapped around the droplets. The heavenly flame completely enveloped the liquid droplets. Under the continuous refinement of the heavenly flame, the liquid droplets slowly merged with the heavy Xian ruler and repaired the body of the ruler. Oh. What was that just now? Hiss, I seem to have heard of it. That is? Oh. The heavy Xian ruler? This is really surprising. The heavy Xian ruler has actually appeared. TSK. While Xiao Yan was repairing the heavy Xian ruler, a young man wearing a green robe was curiously looking at Xiao Yan on a towering ancient tree 1,000 feet away from Xiao Yan. Looks like something has happened to the heavy Xian ruler. Is he trying to borrow the 10,000 beast blood and this pure energy to repair the heavy Xian ruler? Haha, he is indeed too naive. How can the heavy Xian ruler be repaired so easily by you? If that's the case, haha, I will have to rely on you. Haha. The young man looked at Xiao Yan's actions, and softly muttered to himself. After dozens of hours, the huge cluster of energy droplets was finally completely immersed in the heavy Xian ruler. However, Xiao Yan was not happy at all. This was because, originally, he had planned to restore the heavy Xian ruler to its original state, but now, nothing had happened. There was not even the slightest sign of restoration. Xiao Yan frowned and sighed. After a long while, Xiao Yan finally opened his mouth and said, "The friend over there, after watching for so long, shouldn't you come out and meet me?" Chapter 68. Within the range of Xiao Yan's aura, Xiao Yan was able to clearly sense a somewhat obscure aura. The owner of this aura caused Xiao Yan's heart to slightly tighten. The reason for that was because this person's strength had actually reached the level of a 4-star half-martial emperor. Furthermore, from Xiao Yan's probing, this person's age did not exceed 35 years old. Such a young half-martial emperor expert was truly the first person that Xiao Yan had seen since he became an emperor. Although this aura had already been detected by Xiao Yan, due to the matter of repairing the heavy profound ruler, Xiao Yan had never mentioned it. Now that the heavy profound ruler's repair had failed, Xiao Yan naturally loathed the person who was spying on him. Although that person possessed some strength, his speed was not to be underestimated either. At the very most, he would be able to use another Buddha's angry samsara. Once Xiao Yan said those words, the azure-robed man 3,000 feet away from Xiao Yan also smiled in understanding. He smiled at Xiao Yan and replied, "Haha, it's quite troublesome to repair the heavy profound ruler." Seeing that this friend was going through such trouble to repair this ruler, I couldn't help but feel a bit curious. Thus, I stopped to take a look. Hearing those words, Xiao Yan frowned slightly. This person's tone was very gentle and did not contain the slightest trace of hostility. However, to Xiao Yan's surprise, this person actually began to talk about the heavy profound ruler. This caused Xiao Yan to feel a bit strange in his heart. After a long while, Xiao Yan probingly replied, "Since this is the case, you've already seen enough. Since that's the case and you've seen enough, shouldn't you leave?" Hearing those words, the man's brows slightly raised. The words to chase him away were truly straightforward. However, the man immediately reacted. With a thought, he softly laughed and said, "Haha, haha. Of course. Since this friend has ordered me to leave, if this one doesn't leave, it would seem somewhat shameless. Haha, this one will leave right away." Before he finished speaking, the man turned around and walked towards the depths of the mountain forest. However, before he left, he slightly tilted his head and glanced at Xiao Yan. Xiao Yan's eyes flickered when he saw this. He had guessed something in his heart. Thus, when the man disappeared from Xiao Yan's sight, Xiao Yan's figure moved. He flew up from the mountain peak and chased after the man. 15 minutes later, one would be able to sense a faint pressure wherever one's aura reached. At the very least, this pressure was already unparalleled to those dozongs and dozuns. Even an elite doshang would likely have to be extremely cautious when they arrived at this place. At this moment, in the forest, in a slightly remote cave, a huge beast covered with tiger stripes was quietly sleeping. Gusts of wind blew out from its nose as it breathed in and out. From the looks of its aura, this magical beast had already reached the advanced level of a rank 9 magical beast. Its strength was comparable to a human 8-star doshang. It was the overlord level expert of this region. All of a sudden, the giant beast's bell-sized eyes abruptly opened. The hairs all over its body stood on end. Its bloodthirsty eyes were currently covered by a terrifying aura. A rank 9 magical beast's intelligence was quite high. Although it did not know why the high-rank magical beasts on this continent did not know how to transform, their intelligence was clearly displayed. Just a moment ago, this king of the forest had sensed an extremely frightening pressure in an instant. Although the owner of the pressure had already withdrawn, the faint remnant might that was revealed still caused it to feel a kind of terror that could destroy both its body and soul. After a couple of breaths, the owner of the aura finally left this place under the probing of this magical beast. However, before it could relax, another aura flashed by in the next instant. This tiger-shaped magical beast once again trembled. Although this aura was a little weaker than the previous one, this magical beast did not dare to act recklessly. A green-robed human figure slowly came to a stop at the edge of the sky in the outside world. Xiao Yan's figure had also caught up 10,000 feet behind him. The man turned around and saw. A surprised expression flashed across his eyes. Xiao Yan's speed had clearly shocked him. TSK, this speed is something that only I can catch up to if I use all my strength. However, he is able to do it so easily. Looks like he does have some tricks up his sleeve. Seeing that Xiao Yan's speed was even faster than his, the man was merely a little surprised. The expression on his face was once again dominated by a smile. However, this is even more to my liking. It is likely that I might really be able to borrow his strength to succeed. The man's mouth softly muttered. Xiao Yan's figure had also arrived in front of him from the distance. The green-robed man smiled as he looked at the calm and composed Xiao Yan in front of him. He opened his mouth and laughed. Hee, friend's speed is really beyond my expectation. As the saying goes, don't hit a smiling person. Not to mention that the man in front of him spoke in such a calm tone. Xiao Yan's tone was naturally gentle. I just have some tricks up my sleeve. After all, it's impossible to not have any means to escape when you are outside. The man didn't say much after hearing Xiao Yan's casual words. He smiled and said to Xiao Yan again. I think you must have a reason to follow me. The man's words were flat. There was no trace of doubt in his words. Xiao Yan also smiled and said. Since you have a way to repair my ruler, I will naturally follow you. Hearing this, the man's smile became even brighter. He nodded and said with a smile. I just like to deal with smart people. It is convenient and fast. Since this is the case, let's get to know each other first. The man cupped his hands and said with a smile. I am Luo Jin. Xiao Yan quietly remembered this name in his heart when he heard this. After which, he smiled slightly and returned the courtesy as he opened his mouth and said. I am Yan Xiao. Chapter 69. Luo Jin's eyes flashed when he heard this. He smiled at Xiao Yan and cupped his hands together. Brother Yan Xiao, nice to meet you. Xiao Yan also smiled and cupped his hands together. Brother Luo Jin, nice to meet you. Luo Jin nodded his head and did not say any more pleasantries. Instead, he went straight to the point. Brother Yan Xiao, the crack on this huge ruler of yours has already reached deep into its core. If you are careless, it is likely that it will break into two. At that time, it is likely that it will be impossible for you even if you merge all the natural treasures in the world. And your previous act of forcefully fusing will only worsen the damage of this giant ruler. If you do it again, I'm afraid this giant ruler will be destroyed. Xiao Yan's expression changed slightly when he heard this. By saying this, if the heavy Xian ruler were to really break into two, he would instead become the main culprit who had caused all of this. When he thought of this and thought of the importance of the heavy Xian ruler to himself, Xiao Yan instantly felt a sense of guilt deep in his soul. Fortunately, all of this did not happen. Otherwise, it was likely that Xiao Yan would really go berserk and find the third hall chief to kill and take revenge. Xiao Yan's eyes and mouth twitched slightly. His throat rolled and he swallowed a mouthful of saliva. Then, he woke up from Luo Jin's words. After thanking Luo Jin, Xiao Yan immediately opened his mouth to ask Luo Jin in an anxious manner. May I ask Brother Luo, what is the restoration method that you know? This giant ruler is very important to me. I hope Brother Luo can tell me. When Luo Jin heard this, he did not directly answer. Instead, he asked Xiao Yan another question. Luo Jin rubbed his chin with one hand. After his eyes turned a few times, he asked Xiao Yan as if he was guessing. Brother Yan Xiao, if I'm not wrong, the material used to forge your giant ruler should be the rare meteoric flame mysterious iron, right? When Xiao Yan heard this, he raised his eyebrows slightly. He was a little puzzled as to why Luo Jin would ask such a question. However, he still nodded his head in agreement. Luo Jin seemed to have expected Xiao Yan's doubts. Without waiting for Xiao Yan to ask, he continued to speak with a smile. The restoration method that I spoke of is related to this meteorite mysterious iron. Hearing this, Xiao Yan's eyes lit up. If that was the case, it was indeed the best way to repair the dark heavy buster sword. The heavy Xian ruler was originally forged from the flaming meteorite mysterious iron. It was naturally extremely easy to repair it with the flaming meteorite mysterious iron. Of course, Xiao Yan had already thought of such a simple method, but how could the meteorite mysterious iron be so easy to find? The meteorite mysterious iron was one of the rare weapon materials on the continent, and it was extremely rare. Each time it appeared, it would cause a storm on the continent and cause the continent to tremble. Xiao Yan had thought that the meteorite mysterious iron used to forge his dark heavy buster sword might be the last piece in the world. However, from the looks of it now, this was not the case. When Xiao Yan heard Luo Jin's words, he roughly understood. No wonder Luo Jin wanted to ask him about the materials used to forge the dark heavy buster sword. It seemed that he knew where to find the meteorite mysterious iron. Xiao Yan was relieved and turned his gaze to Luo Jin. Luo Jin did not say anything and smiled at Xiao Yan and nodded his head. When Xiao Yan saw this, he was even more delighted. However, Luo Jin's words immediately caused Xiao Yan's expression to instantly turn grave. After Luo Jin nodded his head at Xiao Yan, he said, I do know where to find the meteorite mysterious iron. I do indeed know where the meteorite mysterious iron is. Furthermore, I know that it is a piece of meteorite mysterious iron that is several tens of feet wide. Merely, there is a person there. His strength is roughly that of an 8-star half-martial emperor. The corners of Xiao Yan's mouth twitched a few times. However, in order to repair the dark heavy buster sword, Xiao Yan endured it. Furthermore, to be precise, he is not a person. Instead, he is a magical beast. A high-rank magical beast that has transformed into a human form. The few words high-rank magical beast were especially emphasized by Luo Jin, causing Xiao Yan's expression to become even more serious. A magical beast that was comparable to an 8-star half-martial emperor was indeed a little too terrifying for Xiao Yan. After a long while, Xiao Yan turned his gaze back to Luo Jin and asked with a frown. Since that is the case, I believe Brother Luo also has something that you want, right? Otherwise, you wouldn't have come to cooperate with me. When Luo Jin heard this, he revealed a slightly embarrassed smile. With a smile, he explained to Xiao Yan, for me, it is very troublesome. For me alone, this is indeed a little troublesome. If I'm not careful, I might lose my life. However, now that there are two of us, the chances of success will naturally be higher. When Xiao Yan heard this, the expression on his face was still somewhat unnatural. However, in order to repair the dark heavy buster sword, Xiao Yan was willing to go all out. Xiao Yan narrowed his eyes and asked Luo Jin. Brother Luo, since you know so much about the item in that magical beast's hand and how powerful it is, I believe Brother Luo is already quite familiar with it. In that case, Brother Luo, please explain the origin of this magical beast. When Luo Jin heard this, he knew that Xiao Yan was already on the boat. Therefore, he directly opened his mouth and said, that magical beast is called the Cloud-Splitting Wolf. It is a magical beast in the magical beast world that is known for its tyrannical physical body. The strength of its physical body is enough to tear a 3-star half-martial emperor to pieces. It lives in the deepest part of the Lianyan mountain range, the Green Ridge mountain range. It lives alone, and there is not a single magical beast that is somewhat tyrannical within a radius of several tens of thousands of miles. Xiao Yan knit his brows slightly when he heard this. It seemed that the deterrence of this cloud-splitting wolf was quite great. It was able to occupy such a large mountain range just by living alone. He really did not know whether or not no one would be allowed to stay on this continent if his strength was a little stronger. Xiao Yan exclaimed for a while. Then, he could not help but sigh in his heart. It is still good to have strength. No one dares to invade. Ghost Temple Sect, although I do not know why you know so much about me, since you insist on making me attack, then next time, don't blame me. Chapter 70. Since this is the case, Brother Luo, when should we leave? Xiao Yan sighed emotionally in his heart before opening his mouth to ask Luo Jin. Although his tone was calm, Luo Jin was able to hear a thread of urgency. Luo Jin smiled as he looked towards the horizon. His eyes were filled with wisdom. In the horizon, a patch of red clouds gathered high up in the sky. The scorching sun that had been burning for an entire day had already sunk into the western mountains. Evening quietly arrived. When Xiao Yan saw this, his eyebrows gently raised. Given his intelligence, he naturally understood a little. Xiao Yan nodded his head. He also looked at the fiery red sunset and said without turning his head. Is it because the sky is turning dark? Luo Jin smiled again and nodded his head. His tone was calm as he said. This cloud-splitting wolf can borrow the power of the moon to strengthen himself during the night. Furthermore, the darkness of the night and his wolf tribe's innate speed. If we really go and find him, even if you and I use all our strength, we will not be able to last more than 300 rounds against him. When Xiao Yan heard this, he softly sighed. Immediately, he sat down and closed his eyes to focus on his cultivation. Luo Jin's eyebrows slightly raised and he smiled. This was truly a cultivation maniac. Even at such a time, he was still going all out to cultivate. Luo Jin gently shook his head and closed his eyes. Spiritual energy spread out from his body and in a few breaths' time, he brought the 2 wild rabbits back. Deep in the night, in the forest, a bonfire was emitting flames. When it shone on the surrounding grass and ancient trees, it was as if a thin layer of golden paint had been applied to them. Xiao Yan and Luo Jin sat cross-legged on the ground. Some light was reflected on their faces. Their dark black hair had also turned golden yellow. Luo Jin tore off a piece of meat that was dripping oil from the bonfire and handed it to Xiao Yan. Haha, perhaps it was not roasted well. I hope Brother Yan Xiao will forgive me. Xiao Yan smiled and nodded his head. He took the piece of meat from Luo Jin's hand and took a bite. However, in the next instant, Xiao Yan's action of swallowing his food suddenly paused. His entire face immediately turned green. The corners of Xiao Yan's mouth twitched slightly. He stared at Luo Jin with an ugly expression and did not say a word. When Luo Jin saw this, he thought that Xiao Yan was suspecting him. He hurriedly opened his mouth to explain. Brother Yan Xiao, I did not put poison in it. This is the first time we met, how could I have the intention to harm you? Xiao Yan's face remained green when he heard this. His expression appeared to be somewhat speechless toward this Luo Jin. A long while later, Xiao Yan finally stuck out his tongue. His face twitched slightly and his words were unclear as he opened his mouth to speak with a messy tone. You have never cooked. When these words came out, Luo Jin's expression suddenly froze. He smiled awkwardly and lowered his head without saying a word. Xiao Yan also smiled. He did not expect that Luo Jin did not even know how to cook. He really did not know how he survived in the wilderness. Luo Jin appeared to know what Xiao Yan was thinking in his heart. He once again smiled awkwardly before speaking in an embarrassed manner. In the past, I would only come out after I had bought enough dry rations. Therefore, I have never cooked for myself. Xiao Yan was helpless. This method was really strange. Xiao Yan did not know whether to laugh or cry as he shook his head. With a thought, spiritual energy quickly spread out from between his eyebrows and spread in all directions. In a few breaths, 2 fat wild rabbits flew in front of Xiao Yan. With a thought, Xiao Yan had already packed up the rabbits under Luo Jin's envious gaze. Very quickly, the 2 rabbits were sprinkled with seasoning. Just one look at them would make one's appetite soar and they appeared in front of Luo Jin's eyes. Without any hesitation, Luo Jin stretched out his hands and hugged one of the rabbits. His mouth began to eat in big bites. Xiao Yan smiled and also tore off a rabbit leg from the roasted meat and ate in big bites. The night passed just like that. The next day, a ray of sunlight passed through the layers of trees and shone on the ground in front of the 2. The moment the sunlight shone in, the 2 who were originally sitting cross-legged with their eyes closed suddenly opened their eyes. The 2 of them looked at each other and nodded. They stood up together and flew into the depths of the forest. At this moment, the 2 of them were moving in unison. Although they each had their own strengths, Xiao Yan's methods perfectly made up for everything. The 2 of them were like good friends who had known each other for many years. They were extremely close. As the 2 of them flew, Xiao Yan turned his head and asked Luo Jin. Brother Luo, have you thought of a plan? Otherwise, when the 2 of us fight against the cloud-splitting wolf together, I'm afraid it will be a little dangerous. Hearing this, the corners of Luo Jin's mouth curled into a confident arc. He turned his head and smiled at Xiao Yan as he replied. Of course. Otherwise, with the strength of the 2 of us, it will really be difficult to deal with him. Oh, haha. Then, what is Brother Luo's plan? Let me hear it. It will be easier for us to act when the time comes. Hearing this, Luo Jin nodded his head and continued to speak to Xiao Yan. Although the cloud-splitting wolf's strength is terrifying, it is extremely afraid of sunlight. When the time comes, the 2 of us will work together to lure it out of his cave. You will block his cave and I will use one of my Do techniques to injure it the moment it is suppressed by the sunlight. I will use this to delay it. As for you, you only need to go to his cave and obtain the things that both of us need. Xiao Yan nodded his head in agreement. However, he immediately frowned and opened his mouth to ask. May I know what Brother Luo wants? At that time, it will be easier for me to obtain it. Heaven Imperial Jade Essence. A green-blue spirit stone. At its location, there should be many heaven imperial flowers growing. This can be refined into a high-tier medicinal pill and is beneficial to your cultivation. You can take it. However, I hope that you can help me obtain the Heaven Imperial Jade Essence. If I obtain it, I will owe Brother Yan Xiao a huge favor. I, Luo Jin, will first thank you. Saying this, Luo Jin stopped in the air and cupped his hands heavily at Xiao Yan. He bowed slightly and expressed his gratitude to Xiao Yan.